I came here yesterday with my friends from Connecticut. The journey across the Iowa prairie in a half-covered wagon was very pleasant. The weather was as warm as a summer's day, and the sun shone above a fertile, billowy plain, which extended far, far into the distance. 3/4 of the land of Iowa are said to be of this billowy prairie land. The country did not appear to be cultivated, but looked extremely beautiful and homelike. One immense pasture meadow.
Iowa was still a young state when Fredrika traveled through it, marking her journey through a series of letters. She did not travel far into the state, but she did not go unnoticed. This is Bramer County. It's a rural area located in north-central Iowa with a population of roughly 25,000. Bramer. It's a name that isn't quite local. So where did the name come from? This was Fredrika Bramer. She was a Swedish suffragette born in 1801, and over time her literary works earned her the title of the Swedish Jane Austen. From a young age, Bramer was taught to be the perfect wife. She wasn't allowed to make her own decisions, read books of her own choosing, or even play outside with other children. Her prison-like childhood sent her into a deep depression, one that was only cured by her love for writing.
I was locked away for years, not allowed the same freedoms as my male counterparts, forced to learn how to be a righteous woman. Writing was my escape into a fantasy world of my creation.
She began writing anonymously, starting her career with The Neighbors, a story of everyday life. Her most influential novel was Hertha. This was one of the several books to ignite the flame of liberation in the hearts of many early Swedish suffragettes. Her works told the stories of ordinary housewives trapped in their own homes. Their restricted rights were put on display for all to see. Her books were approachable with the burgeoning women's suffrage movement in 1840s America. Bramer's work shed a light on the grueling patriarchy women of the time endured.
She fits really well with what the women's rights movements were at the time. If anything, she's kind of ahead of the American one in some ways. But as far as I know, she did not have direct contact with the leaders of the women's rights movement in America at the time. She actually had direct contact with some of the people who had direct contact with them, because the literary people, particularly of New England, are like the friends, cousins, brothers, of the women's rights advocates.
This was all possible because of Bramer's thirst for independence, and for her, that meant she would never marry. Johann Backlund was the only known person to ever propose to Bramer, and he did so multiple times, but she always denied his advances. Bramer was not interested in matrimony. He was only useful to her as an educator, and Bramer wanted nothing more. The institution of marriage went against everything she believed in. The shackles of matrimony would invalidate the freedoms she wrote about and fought so hard to achieve. Backlund taught her theology, philosophy, and literature. His influence propelled her deeper into academics, and she became a prolific author and traveler. It was the same curiosity and hunger for knowledge, along with her overseas audience, that brought her to the Americas.
The time that she visits America is, if you put it into a period of several decades, is when America was a really hot topic for Europeans. And so each European who came here to visit is a hot topic for Americans.
During her trip to North America, Bramer traveled around the East Coast, visiting slave plantations in the South and even crossing the sea to Cuba. While in the Midwest, she visited Native American reservations and traveled south down the Mississippi River. No matter where she was, she kept an eye out for Scandinavian settlements in the New World. As she traveled, she maintained a steady exchange of letters with her sister, Anne Backlund, who remained in Sweden.
Good morning, little sister, or rather good evening in the New World. where I now set firm foot after 13 days rocking at the sea.
She used her letters to communicate her journey through a young state. That young state was Iowa. Due to the rough Des Moines rapids, steamboats during the time were forced to unload cargo and passengers at Montrose, Iowa. According to several sources, Bramer would have been dropped off either at Fort Madison or at Montrose. Bramer never specifically mentioned either town in her letters, but we can assume that she would have been unloaded at Montrose because of her observations of the Mormon temple at Nauvoo, an Illinois settlement across the river that she would not have been able to see should she be delivered to Fort Madison.
We are now within the site of Nauvoo, formerly the capital of Mormon district, and the magnificent ruin of their former temple is seen standing on its elevated site.
Her arrival at Montrose can also be assumed because it was where goods and passengers were deposited before crossing the Des Moines Rapids. From here, Bramer would have ventured south on wagon to Keokuk.
At the time, it was kind of still a frontier area. I don't want to say, Wild West, but it was still a really young city. It had just been incorporated in 1847, so everything was still pretty new. Folks were still kind of getting settled. There were always new people coming in.
Bramer's stay in Keokuk was very short-lived. Having only stayed for a few hours, she ate dinner at an unknown inn, socialized at an unknown saloon, and boarded a vessel to St. Louis around 10 or 11 p.m.
I would assume that just as a person traveling through, she probably wouldn't really have been noticed a whole lot. She would have just looked like another traveler. Of course, once the name was in the paper, people might have thought, oh, wait a second, maybe I did see, but they might not have also known what she looked like either. So unless she announced her visit or, in some way her presence was known in the city while she was here, I don't know that too many people probably would have noticed.
In this snippet from the Keokuk Dispatch, a local newspaper from the mid-1800s, it provides concrete evidence that Bramer visited Keokuk on Saturday, November 2nd, 1850. In a newspaper from August of 1850, it listed 5 hotels and inns that existed in Keokuk at the time. Bramer could have lodged at any of these during her short stay. Unfortunately, there are no buildings left standing that would have existed in Keokuk during Bramer's visit in 1850. Bramer's journey through Iowa was very short, lasting only a span of a few days. While her Keokuk visit was brief, we have even less information on her time in Montrose. But what about Bramer County? Why would this area be named after her if she never set foot here?
I would say that almost no one outside of Bremer County knows the origin of the county's name.
I was talking to a couple of people that I was going to be doing an interview with you guys today, and they hadn't really heard the name before.
The truth behind the naming of Bramer County and the townships of Fredrika and Bramer is this.
It's named from an Iowa governor, Stephen Hempstead, who wanted to honor Fredrika Bramer. She was a noted travel writer and passed along Iowa's border and stayed in a few Iowa communities on her way down the Mississippi River. She was a noted Swedish travel writer, and he thought that we ought to name a county after her, which produces Bremer County as we often pronounce it now. She would have pronounced her name Bramer.
When I first realized that Bremer County and Fredrika are named after her, I thought it must be because she made a special stop in that area. That doesn't seem to be the case. It's, I think, more that she is very famous. The governor likes her. Now remember that the governor of Iowa at that point had something like 22 new counties to name. So he had lots of leeway to get creative. In those days, it really wasn't very common to name a county in that part of America after a woman. So it's remarkable. I think it's that she was a star.
Interestingly enough, the town of Fredrika was actually spelled wrong. At the time, most journalists never actually knew how to spell her name, mainly because that information was spread by word of mouth. It wasn't just these locations that were named after Bremer. A school in Des Moines opened in 1874 called the Fredrika Bremer School, which unfortunately closed 100 years after its opening in 1974. In Bremer County, her name remained relevant to local Fredrika Bremer researcher Carla Larson, who petitioned to have a meeting room at the Waverly Public Library named after Bremer. Her legacy persists in the depths of Iowa, one that survives in all women today who strive for freedom and equality. This is Fredrika Bremer.